Hello, welcome again to the Rotten Horror Picture Show, the horror movie podcast where we talk about films off the Rotten Tomatoes 200 best horror movies of all time list, or at least that's technically what we're supposed to do. We haven't been doing that lately. But my name is Clay, and with me as always is Amanda. How are you doing, Amanda?
I'm good. I'm here in my kitten heels, and I have my black patent leather purse, and I'm ready to record.
I, in the style of our previous month of recordings, am surrounded by mannequins, so I'm good to go. What's that?
What do you mean our previous month of recording? That's just how your house always looks.
Yeah, well, more than usual.
Ah,
yeah. Did you see that video of the house? So that narrows it down. Okay, this is going to be hard to describe for people who haven't seen this, but there was a video going around, a kind of a viral video of a house for sale. That the house was filled with mannequins that were like had like movie costumes and superhero costumes and stuff on them, and they were just all over this house. And I was very surprised to find out that this house in question, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Actually, was my aunt's house.
Oh.
Yeah. She moved probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago.
That is not where I expected this to be going.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it was really funny for my family to see a camera filming through this house that we are all very familiar with that is now or had been filled with mannequins. Anyway.
Now, when your aunt lived there, did she have the full human-sized Wonder Woman, Catwoman?
Unfortunately,
in
no.
her house?
No, unfortunately, no. For better or worse, she did not. Yeah, we're throwing you guys a bit of a curveball this week, and I'll tell you why. Because one of the movies that I've been wanting to do for a long time on this show is Mario Bava's Blood and Black Lace, and it was playing down the street from us this past week, so we decided to take a bit of a detour and do that since it was an opportunity to see it in glorious. It was a beautiful 4K projection. It looked absolutely amazing, and if you've seen this movie, you know how good that can look. So we'll be back with the others next time, but for tonight, we are talking about Mario Bava's Blood and Black Lace from 1964, a.k.a. Six Women for the Killer, a.k.a. Red Knights of the Iron Hand, which sounds like some sort of weird sex comedy or something, or sex club.
Or the sequel to The Man in the Iron Mask.
Yeah, Red Knights of the Iron Hand.
Yeah, but Knights with a K.
Yes. This is not on our list, but it has a 80% Rotten Tomatoes score with a 76% audience score. Had you seen this before?
No, I had not seen this one before. This was one for me that was kind of always on my radar in the background, but I never realized how fucking cool it looks.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
This is all part of my plan to just jam as many of these Giallo and Italian movies down yours and everybody else's throat I possibly can.
Indoctrinate as many people at once.
Yes, I've already our faithful listener Kyle has been completely indoctrinated and has bemoaned to me many times about how much money he spent buying Giallo DVDs to watch because of my recommendations. But
because you have passed the curse along.
I have. But yes. This is I have seen this a few times. I think this was one. So I got into a Bava phase, I think, in college. I think this was another one of those things where, as I was really kind of digging into these movies and kind of going back in time a little bit, I really kind of hooked into the Bava movies because I had seen Suspiria, and then I had taken the next step back, and I had come across Mario Bava. And the first of his I think I saw was Black Sabbath, which is another movie we're going to do eventually because that movie fucking rocks. But I was absolutely blown away by the visuals of that movie. And so I continued down that path, eventually coming to this one, which is it's about as cool looking a movie as you could possibly get. The colors are
absolutely
unbelievable. It's the kind of thing that it's there's this interesting period when things really switch to color, where they go a little crazy. Especially directors who have worked in color for the first time, which is not the case here. But it's really fun to see these movies that are kind of like in the early '60s, where color is new, and so they're going a little wacky. They're pushing the dial a little bit too much. But he had made a couple movies in color, and they all look amazing. He's kind of like a painter in that way. But yeah, this one really stood out to me, and I've always liked it. And as I got deeper into the Giallo stuff, I kind of realized or learned that this is a pretty foundational text for all that, which is I'm sure I will go on about at length in a few minutes. But for now, we are going to take a quick break, play the trailer for you, and talk about it.
A house of high fashion, a dazzling whirl of elegance, of exotic, extravagant beauties. An adventurous journey into the devastating allure of the most sophisticated women and their intimate secrets.
Suddenly, these lace curtains ignite a drama that will lacerate your emotions. Blood and black lace. Who is this shrouded, sadistic, sordid fiend who maims and murders? Why this bloodthirsty orgy, this holocaust of lives? Blood and black lace in bleeding color. A shattering, shivering, shocking experience.
Okay, Blood and Black Lace from 1964, directed by Mario Bava, written by Marcello Fondato, Giuseppe Baria, and Mario Bava. Some names that I can kind of actually pronounce.
Yeah, I think you did good.
Thank you. Arrivederci. Buongiorno. Starring Cameron Mitchell, Ava Bartok, Ariana Guarini, Dante...
Say Ariana Grande.
Yep, she's in it. Cameo in the background. Dante DePaolo, Mary Arden, Franco Ressel, Claudia Dantes, and Luciano Pagozzi, a.k.a. the Italian Peter Lorre. Amanda, what happens in Blood and Black Lace?
A masked, shadowy killer brutally murders the models of a scandalous fashion house in Rome.
Yeah, okay. Pretty much.
Well, you can't summarize it with much more than that, right? It starts to give things away.
Yeah,
a little too much.
I think you could do a longer one that kind of hints at the mystery and involving the diary and whatnot, but you don't really need to.
Well, Clay, some things you'll find in Blood and Black Lace include fashion.
Fashion. Turn to the left.
Fashion.
Yes, this is really interesting because this is a movie that very much takes place in the fashion world, but only in the background. There's like there's like half a scene of a fashion show going on in the background, but the rest of the movie is so stylish that it just feels like that's where the whole thing takes place.
Yeah, exactly. You get like one glimpse at women actually sewing the clothes, and then we're done. We're out of there.
It also has that kind of like, I feel like it has a bit of that thing where they understand kind of how fashion works, but they didn't really bother to figure out the specifics of it. Where it's like,
not at all.
Backstage at this thing, they're like, well, we need a person for this. We got to sew. This is all stuff that they would have done well beforehand.
Yeah. The fact, even like the way they're dressing the girls when they're lining up, it's just like, this is not how this would work right now.
Yeah. It reminded me of, I just watched that movie Saturday Night about the first Saturday Night Live episode. And one of the things that kept bugging me, and maybe it was like this, I don't know, because they hadn't pinned down the show or anything yet, but like in the movie, they are still rehearsing scenes seemingly for the first time, even though they've got costumes and stuff, like 5 minutes before the show starts. And like, if there's one thing that I know about Saturday Night Live, is that they have that shit pretty locked in before the show starts. So like,
I mean, now,
maybe they didn't back then, but I don't know. It was just one of those things where it's like, I feel like they are really bending how this worked for the sake of this movie. But
yeah. Well, Clay, you'll also find an Asian woman?
Question mark. Yeah.
Is she supposed to be Chinese or something?
Think
Her
so.
name is like Thao Li or like.
Yes.
It's very bizarre. It's a very, very bizarre choice.
Yeah, it's she definitely has a Asian name, and they gave her some good old light Asian makeup on the eyes there.
Jesus.
But it's like,
And the haircut.
the haircut, but it's like, it's weird because it's subtle enough that it doesn't come off as offensive, unless you really notice the fact that she's supposed to, that she has that name. Like, if she didn't have that name,
it's so confusing.
Yeah,
like it's such a weird choice because it has absolutely nothing to do with the plot.
Right. Yeah.
So it's just so confusing that you're like, can I be offended by this? Because she's not. There's no comments about her ethnicity or like she's never. Oh, she's going back to her homeland. Like there's none of that. It's just like, maybe she's supposed to be Asian of some kind and maybe not.
Yeah, there's no like stereotype attached to her character. Like, she doesn't ward the killer off using all of the fireworks she keeps in her house or something. Yeah. You know, it's pretty strange.
Yes.
Maybe it was progressive for the time just to have that character. Yeah. I don't know. But
maybe.
One thing I know about Italian movies from the 60s and 70s, progressive.
Yeah, definitely. Never offensive.
Never.
Well, you'll also find weapons of opportunity or death by suit of armor.
Yeah, you got to. That's if I was that guy, I would just be luring her closer and closer to the suit of armor to kill her with it, just because you got to do it.
But there are so many of the deaths in this movie are done via a convenient element nearby and not really like, I brought a gun. Right. Yes. Like, it's all very like, I don't know, I'm going to burn you on this hot furnace that is in the basement heating the building.
Yeah. It's another nice precursor to the Argento stuff where it's like, oh, there's nothing that can kill you in this room unless, let's say, your head were to fall through this window and turn it into a plate glass guillotine.
Right. Along with that, you'll also find Mario Bava's Guide to Physical Fitness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which
that killer
is just, yeah.
very fit.
Doing a lot of deadlifts.
Yes, literally.
But
yes.
No.
I seriously, as we were watching it, I'm watching him carry this woman up like 5 flights of stairs.
Yeah.
I was like, this is ridiculous.
Multiple women, but even the other women carry the women sometimes.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because she puts her in the trunk.
She and then the girl who doesn't know she's in the trunk, who gets home and opens her trunk and finds her dead friend, drags her all the way up the driveway into the house, up the stairs, and under the other stairs.
You know,
people are just dragging each other all over the place in this movie.
We can get into it, because the one thing you can't really bring to a Giallo movie, or I should say you have to check at the door, is like plausibility for the most part. Yeah. But that was one where it's like, man, just close the trunk.
Right.
Why go through all that work?
Gotta get her out of the car. She's gonna stain the upholstery.
I guess.
You'll also find a homicidal sex maniac.
One of my favorite things to come out of these movies is how many times they pin it on a sex maniac. Which,
yeah, I do want to talk about that later.
Yeah, which I don't know if that was a string of things happening in Italy at the time, ripped from the headlines, but it's always funny. It's always funny in these movies when they're saying, I don't know, it was probably a sex maniac.
Yeah. You will also find an open-ended cop plot.
Yeah, this really highlights my thoughts on the cop plot, which is at a certain point in this movie, the cops just disappear and don't have anything to do for the rest of the time.
Yeah, they sort of shrug and go, I guess we better look elsewhere.
Yeah.
And just disappear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. There's no questionable parenting in this. There's no. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, seems like that one guy, the killer, was probably not raised right, but.
Well, yeah, but we can't. We got to go based on what we see in the movie, right?
That's true.
Yeah, got to limit it somehow.
Yeah,
maybe the scope narrow.
Maybe his father was killed in the war. He's just been. Although that guy was probably, would he have fought in the war? He might have fought in the war. He was anyway. So Blood and Black Lace. This comes at the end of a pretty impressive run for Mario Bava, where you've got The Evil Eye, which is widely regarded as the first classic Giallo movie, which we can talk about in a little bit, followed by Black Sabbath, followed by The Whip and the Body, and then Blood and Black Lace. 4 films in 2 years, and all of which are pretty killer. And yeah, this is he does The Evil Eye, which is also known as The Girl Who Knew Too Much, and between that movie and this movie, it really solidifies what will become the Giallo kind of thing. The whole the big boom, much like slasher movies in the States, the boom for this stuff doesn't happen for about another 6 or 7 years, because it's Bird with the Crystal Plumage is the one that really kicks it off in 1970. But he's really laying the groundwork for every movie to come after it between those two, where he's got The Evil Eye is more traditional as far as it's an American who comes to Italy who sees a murder and then kind of gets gaslit for the whole movie and then ends up having to deal with the thing at the end.
Yeah.
And this is the other group of plots that they tend to do, which is more of a whodunit with a very stylized setting and background and look and everything. But what are your thoughts on Blood and Black Lace?
I really loved this one. Yeah. I'm a big sucker for a whodunit.
Mm-hmm. Like, I'm glad you liked it, because I as we were watching it, I was like, these can really go either way. Like, there's nothing wrong with this, but if you're not in the mood, if it doesn't hit you the right way, this could just be stupid. But
no, I'm like I said, I'm a big sucker for whodunits. This was like if Agatha Christie had gone on an Italian vacation and done just a little bit of LSD.
As she should have.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what she did. Isn't there like a period of her life where she disappeared for like a month or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's where she was.
Maybe that's where she was. But I really enjoy that style, and I think this movie, more so than some of the other Giallo ones, actually pulls off the mystery of like who's killing people, and then the reveal. Mm-hmm. Like when it happens, when you find out who it is, you're like, oh, okay. Like this fits with all of the pieces we've been given over the course of the film. It's not like Bird with the Crystal Plumage, where it's just like, yes, I have now recalled that memory that no one else saw in this, and no one else could have possibly known, and this is what's happening.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is also definitely an example of a movie where the style and the visuals do a lot of the heavy lifting and sort of cover a myriad of sins. Like, if you start to really dig into the logic of this movie and people's behavior within it would fall apart immediately. It just like a house of cards, it would all kind of come tumbling down. Starting with the very first murder, why would they put her in the armoire?
Right, yeah, why not?
Yeah,
Because it's cool.
right, exactly. And this movie is stylized enough throughout that I think that works. Mm-hmm. Even if you're sort of in that, like, well, that doesn't make it. Why would they do that? You're like, you can kind of tell from this movie, from the very opening credits, that this is not a movie that's asking you to play detective in that way. It more just wants you to sort of sit and soak in the experience and enjoy what you're looking at.
Yeah, I was watching on the Blu-ray for this. There's a couple really great documentaries about this and about Bava, and one of the people talking said that for Bava, images and feel are more important than the story. And I feel like that's true, but I don't think it's true in a way where he's throwing the story out completely, because the best of these kind of movies, these Giallo or Gialli, if you will, if you want to say it correctly, I guess, are the ones that, like, as I've been watching these, because I've watched a lot of these in the last year, I've been trying to figure out what it is about them that I like, and what are the ones that really have me locked in, where I, because some of them are just like, yeah, this is kind of fun, this is killer, this is whatever, some boobs in it or whatever. Yeah. But like, what are the ones that really grab me?
So jaded.
What are the ones that really grab me? And the ones that really grab me are the ones that really walk the line between reality and surreality, where you've got a setup which is preposterous, but it's played just honest enough that you kind of just like let it happen, and you kind of you're in for the ride here. And the specifics don't matter as much as the feel of the rest of it, where it's like like this movie in particular, you're watching this, and if you're doing your best to try and figure out who the killer is, I feel like you're doing it wrong, because this is definitely more of a visceral experience type of movie than it is like a Poirot mystery.
Right.
And on one of these documentaries, this one guy who's a writer was saying, well, the thing about the Giallo is every Giallo has to be the kind of story where if you get to the end and when they discover who the killer is, there has to have been enough information in the movie that the audience could have figured it out. And I'm like, buddy, have you never seen one of these? that's like the exact opposite of how these work, because it's always something insane. Like, it's never something that you could possibly have guessed given what they show you in the movie. And this is one too, where, like, as you're saying, even from the beginning, where they put Isabella in the armoire, you don't think about it at the time, but when you take a step back, you go, well, the rest of this movie, the reason they kill Isabella is because she knows that these other two were secretly married, and that the death of the woman's husband was not an accident, right?
Right.
But
she's blackmailing him.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the reason they kill everybody else is purely because they found her body. And it started
it's the diary.
Well, that's true. Yeah. But regardless, putting her in a place where she could be discovered as dead is the thing that gets this ball rolling. And if they had just not done that, then they would have been scot-free. But since it's a Giallo movie, since it's a horror movie, they have to do that. And so you end up in this
she has to have hidden her diary in a box in the fashion studio. Like, not at home.
Yes.
Like, it has to be somewhere where somebody finds it and everyone sees that it's been found.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot a thing you'll find. I was gonna say inversion of the magic book, because the diary I consider a magic book.
Oh.
I think it serves the same purpose.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we were watching, my girlfriend and I have been watching our way through Twin Peaks. And when you and I were watching this last night, that was the first thing I thought of when they found the diary. I was like, oh, obviously Laura Palmer's diary is a big part of the Twin Peaks mystery. And when I got home, my girlfriend said, yeah, it reminded me of Twin Peaks. I said, oh, because of the diary? And she said, no, because of the cocaine.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, yeah. That wasn't where I went to first, but I understand.
Yeah, there's definitely a solid there's a solid kind of spiritual connection between this movie and Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
If you're looking at it, it's like beautiful young women mixed up in bad news stuff and men who are willing to kill them over it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the whole like secret lives and secret diaries and all of that. It's like just to the side of a soap opera like Twin Peaks is.
Yeah. And it is a great setup that I feel like never really gets old, because they still do it to this day, of glamorous outer shell giving way to more of a seamy underbelly.
Yeah, I think there's also something with Giallo movies as well, where some of the best settings for them are in these kind of like private feminine spaces. Mm-hmm. Because I think, like Bava and Argento and all of them have a bit of a fascination with the idea of like a beautiful woman having secrets and having some sort of dark side and being secretly troubled. And so you get a movie like this in a fashion studio, or you get Suspiria in the, ballet school or some sort of boarding school situation. And those settings I feel like are so perfect for this kind of movie, because it allows for that like heightened stylized thing, as well as the interpersonal tension of like all of these people who are forced into very close proximity and have all of these crazy meshed and intertwined relationships trying to hide things from each other. Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's why these kinds of settings are perfect for murder mysteries, right? Because if you've if you set your murder mystery in the city, it could be literally anybody. But as soon as you set it at a school, or is 10 Little Indians, it's like an island or something.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So, they've been lured to an island. Yeah.
Yeah. You get this setup where you get your tension from the idea that it has to be one of these people that you've seen.
Yes.
It's very, very tight as far as the old narrative circle goes.
Yeah. And this movie does like a really, it's really fun. Like the opening credits are so cool, the way that they're done, and it sort of introduces you to all of the major players.
Yes, yeah.
But this movie like just drops you in to their web very in the middle of things. Like you don't get an easy introduction. Like you sort of get like two people outside having a clandestine meeting while one person is fixing a sign while someone else is getting out of a cab, and it's dark and it's stormy,
talking about needing some sort of drug they haven't specified.
Exactly. And so it's all very vague and very unformed, and you're just sort of thrust into it. And something else that I found interesting about this movie was the lack of a main character.
I was going to ask you, who do you think the main character of this movie is? Because I honestly don't have an answer for that.
I don't know. I was genuinely shocked when Peggy died, because I thought Peggy was going to get rescued and be our main character. Like,
yeah.
I thought it was going to be her and the guy who has fits, who's in love with her. Like, I thought they were sort of going to emerge halfway through as like the couple that, you're pretty sure neither one of them did it, and he's in love with her, and she, her roommate was killed, and so they're gonna try and figure out what the hell is happening here. And instead, she gets brutally murdered, and he has an outburst in a police station and gets carted away, and you like never see him again. So there is no central character or point of view character who you as an audience member can kind of hang your hat on.
Right.
And I think that adds to the sort of sense of disorientation and displacement in this movie that keeps you just confused enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
In my opinion.
Like, if you go by the rules of who the people at the end of the movie are, technically the main character is the woman who runs the fashion studio. Christiania. But she's absent from so much of the movie that it's not like she's a character we're following the entire time, you know? And that's...
Yeah, she's in the background and she's plotting against people. Like,
right, yeah.
She's one of the bad guys in the end. She kind of... She doesn't even really redeem herself. She just, avoids getting murdered just barely and then avenges herself and then dies.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, too, because one of, obviously, the kind of core tenet of the classic Giallo movie is this singular character who gets dropped into this situation who has to become the amateur sleuth, which is what the evil eye is. But this very much is not. This is like everything else except that.
Yeah. Everyone is so complicatedly intertwined with each other in this movie. Like, if you start trying to explain who everyone is to one another and how they're all connected and why any of them would care either about Isabella dying or the diary or something else, it starts to get really confusing.
Right. Yeah.
Like, if you try to map it out, you're like, okay, well, Isabella had been dating Franco, but they were fighting because he's doing drugs and he's cheating on her with Peggy. So when she dies, Peggy finds the journal and Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
So
and then James
I'm already getting
sings a song with Maddie and Donna.
Yeah, it's interesting how it really is like a soap opera web of relationships. And it keeps things complicated enough to keep like the murder mystery element just totally an open-ended question for the whole movie.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the way in which these people relate to one another and the relationships that they have don't actually matter.
Right. Yeah. I think it does a really great job of getting you in. It's one of those things where another movie like this, I feel like you would be like, oh, well, the main character is actually the diary, right? It's the thing that everybody wants because they do this great job of setting up where once they discover that a diary exists, everybody starts to get on edge because everybody has something they're trying to hide. Even if you don't even find out what half of those are in the movie as the movie goes on, it's a great setup because once the diary disappears, then the game is on, right? And so traditionally, it would be like a game of hot potato until that thing pops up at the end and, yada, yada, yada. But here, nope, they get rid of that like 10 minutes in. They just throw it into the fire, gone. It's almost like...
she straight up burns it, yeah.
It's almost like Peggy... I think it's Peggy, right? Peggy burns it?
Yes.
Yeah, Peggy tears out the pages that are important to her, and then she kind of does something that would break the movie generally, where she's like, you know what? It'll make everybody's lives easier if I just burn this.
Right. Yeah, she rips out her pages and burns them and then just sort of like pauses for a split second and then chucks the whole thing into the fireplace. Yeah. Yeah, which it's interesting because, like you're saying, that would usually break the conceit of the movie. But when the masked killer shows up at her house and starts threatening her, and she keeps saying, I burned it, I'm telling you, you have to believe me. He doesn't believe her. Right. So
another
then
instance
the string
where,
of killing
another
just
instance
has to keep going.
Where everything could have been fine if he just believed her. And like, all right, great, everybody's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Could have just bailed. Could have just,
Yeah. And it's nice. It's nice to see this kind of setup too, because then what happens after that is kind of entirely a result of the killer consistently kind of fucking up a bit and trying to figure out how to close the lid on this thing that could have been easily lid closed twice before.
This movie, I just realized, is the Giallo version of If You Give a Mouse a Cookie.
Explain.
You know, the children's book, if you give a mouse a cookie, he's probably going to want some milk. If you give a mouse some milk, he's going to want this. You know, like, it's that whole thing. It's the, you know, you buy a cat to eat the rat, you buy a dog to eat the cat.
Sure.
You buy... like, it's like they keep having to go to the next extreme because they did the thing before.
Right,
So
yes.
because they kill Isabella and the diary gets discovered, well, then they have to kill Nicole because they think Nicole has the diary. And then it turns out Peggy stole the diary from Nicole. So then you have to kill Peggy because she has the diary. And then because you killed Peggy, you have to set up somebody else to take the fall. And you have to kill that person. And so on down the chain until there's, you know, in the mastermind's plan, only one person left who gets to take all the money and run.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. They do the 30 years earlier, they do the Scream rug pull where you just discover there are actually two killers, which I think is fun. Which I feel like was fairly uncommon at the time.
Yeah.
And I think that
probably
that
in
works
having a man and a woman, right?
Yeah. But yeah, by the time you get to the end of this mystery, when you finally are told what's going on, it's one of those things where if you care about being able to solve the mystery, like you care about the movie playing fair in any kind of way, you would go like, this is preposterous. How would I ever have known that these two were secretly married and her husband's death was not an accident and that Isabella knew this? You know, it's not something you could possibly ever guess.
There are hints that Isabella is blackmailing one of the men for money. Mm-hmm. There are a couple times where, like, I think when Peggy reads through the journal, and maybe there's some other throwaway line where she says, like, I think in the journal, she's like, you know, I lent Peggy 100,000 lira for an abortion. So, you know, tomorrow I'll ask that bastard for 200,000. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, there's a hint that somebody is being blackmailed, but I don't think it gets much more specific than that, like, she is fighting with Franco about drugs and she's blackmailing somebody about money.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all we got.
I think what you probably could do if you were really running over this movie with a movie plot logic fine-tooth comb is maybe the minute that Christiana starts talking about her husband dying in an accident, you should go, oh, well, obviously that's not what happened.
Right.
But there's really
right.
no reason for her to be a suspect at that point.
If you would want to figure this out before you get to the very end of the movie, I think the key to it is just being familiar enough with Giallo tropes. Mm-hmm. And just kind of being able to take a good guess and a good stab in the dark.
Yeah.
At where a movie like this would probably bring you, because one of the fun things about this movie is there are a lot of great little fake outs and like red herrings in different moments that are really, in my opinion, I like them. I know they're kind of silly, but like when they show up at Peggy's house and there's somebody in the black trench coat leaned over tending the fire. Oh yeah. And it turns out it's not the killer, it's their housekeeper.
Right.
You know, and it's this like, I don't know, sort of silly thing. And the movie itself sort of sets up Tao Li like she might be the killer. Like she makes it really far towards the end of the movie. And there's a lot of different moments where the camera kind of stays on her face and she makes sort of, you know, kind of stern or bitter expressions. And like when the men are being kept in the prison overnight, all the other women are very nervous. They're either outrightly really scared or they're very, very nervous. And Tao Li is just like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. Mm-hmm. And I think the other woman who's going to marry the Marquise is like, well, aren't you scared? Like, your roommates have both been killed at this point. And she's like, no, I'm good. I'd rather be alone. And so it's a little...
And statistically,
the movie...
she's probably right. She's like, I mean, what are the chances?
Yeah. But, you know, the movie is definitely at different moments trying to lead you to suspect each person in turn. Like certain characters leave just before the killer comes and they never are on screen at the same time, or they seem to know when the cops are going to show up and things like that. But it's really not like the murder mystery part of it is fun, but it's definitely not the point.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've probably talked about this before, but where do you fall on that as far as if you're watching a movie like a murder mystery type movie, do you want the filmmakers to play fair, or does it bother you if you get to the end and you go, oh, well, there's no way I could have guessed that?
I think it bothers me with certain... It kind of depends on the broader genre that we're talking about. Like, if it is like a Poirot, Agatha Christie sort of thing, I do want there to at least be enough that you could have put it all together, as unlikely as it is. If we're watching something like a Giallo movie, I'm like, it's not logic is not why I'm here.
Right.
So I don't know. I think for me, it really depends. It's really much more about like what is the movie itself trying to do? Because if we're watching like a Knives Out, then yeah, I want to be able to figure out who's actually doing it.
Okay, that's a good. Did you see Glass Onion?
Yeah.
How did you feel about Glass Onion? Because that's one.
Mixed.
That's one where they're really manipulating you with the art, with the medium, versus just laying it out in a way that's easily solvable or possibly solvable.
Yeah, that one I had mixed feelings about because I think it was so obvious that he was bad. And so I understood why they maybe felt like they needed to throw an extra loop in there to keep it interesting. But yeah, I definitely preferred like the original Knives Out, the first one, where you could sort of put it all together as you were going.
Yeah, Glass Onion was in it because I enjoyed it, and I was when they kind of once they kind of laid their hand out as to how this was going to go, when they do that bit where you're going up to a certain point and then they jump back like however many days or whatever. Once I saw they were doing that, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna roll with this.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you are someone who's watching this type of movie with an eye on being smarter than the movie and solving it before the movie does, then I think it's going to make you mad.
Yes.
So like
I think this movie would make you mad too, right?
Right.
Like if you went into this trying to solve this before you got to the very end, you'd be like, what the fuck? This is... Yeah. Like it's plausible when they get to the end, but yeah, it's not the point. Yeah.
There was an episode. Last year or the year before, I went through and I watched every episode of Columbo. And,
I remember that.
I really enjoyed Columbo because it inverts the formula where you see the killer, you know who he is from the minute the show starts. You see the murder actually happen, and then it's a what's the term? It's not a whodunit, it's a whydunit, I think is what people call it. So you figure you're learning why they killed this person, but you're also watching the person's the slack on their rope get shorter and shorter as Columbo gets closer and closer, right? And I think that's a really fun way to mix it up. But when we got to the revival of Columbo, because it was off TV for like 10 years or something, the first episode had the most insane, I don't even want to call it a twist, explanation for murder I have ever seen. And I was like, you've got, this is, it was was the kind of thing where it's like, all right, your credulity has just gone completely out the window, and there is absolutely zero way you could have solved this, because to briefly summarize it,
this is a Columbo podcast now,
this
right?
is a Columbo podcast. I would love to do a Columbo podcast.
Yeah.
There's this guy who's been working. He's like a mentalist who's been working for the Air Force, using his perceived psychic powers as they're doing research into ESP and all that kind of stuff, right? And then there's another guy who's a magician who knows this guy and knows that this guy is full of shit, even though the army or whoever believes this guy and is going to give him this big grant and everything. And so the guy who has the grant with the army kills the other magician, right? Mm-hmm. All right, sure, makes sense. Plausible as to why that would happen. Nope. When you get to the end, you find out that the reason he killed him is because 10 years before, they were both imprisoned in an Algerian jail.
Oh,
and one of them broke out and didn't break the other one out. And so he had held a grudge the entire time. It's like, what the fuck what am I supposed to do with this?
That is beyond Giallo versions of the killer reveal at the end.
Yeah, it was absolutely insane.
That's I do want to talk about, like, in this movie, I know in our Things You'll Find, we mentioned earlier that all of a sudden the cops, well, not all of a sudden. So these murders have been happening and the police have their set of suspects and they're pretty sure it's one of the men. So they lock up all the men for the night, and then another murder happens. Mm-hmm. So they say, oh no, I guess it couldn't possibly be these men.
Right.
So it must be some unconnected sex maniac who's driven insane by beautiful women, and you know, because he can't possess them, he must destroy them. Mm-hmm. So we're going to just give up on investigating this group of people, and we're going to go after the sex maniac.
It is really funny that there is a scene where the lead cop, who also could plausibly have been the main character but is not.
Yes. But is not.
Has a moment where he's like, well, they all have pretty solid alibis, so
yeah.
All right, I guess we'll go do something else.
Yeah. Start over. Start investigating from the beginning. Let's get out of here. One reason I kind of love that, though, is because the stereotype, and I'm not saying this was done at the time on purpose. Maybe it kind of was. Mm-hmm. But probably not. But the stereotype of these sorts of movies, and then later on the stereotype of the more common slasher film, is that it is a sex maniac.
Right, yes, yeah.
And in this, it's not.
Right.
They're doing it for money. Like that's it. Isabella is blackmailing them, and it's ruining them financially. And Morlacki, the guy who's married the countess who runs the fashion salon, he just wants her money. Mm-hmm. So that's it. It really is just a thing about greed. It's not as much as some of the kills are eroticized and you know, women get their blouses torn, mm-hmm. or she's already undressed to her slip when she gets killed, right. or whatever. They're not. They're sort of doing that on purpose to make the cops go like, wow, this must be a sex maniac. And the cops just fall for it and go in that direction. And, you know, had Morlacki's plan gone smoothly to the end, he would have just walked away with a bunch of jewels.
Right. Yeah.
And they would have just kept looking for a sex maniac that they never found.
Yeah. 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 I don't know. That's a tough call, because I don't know if they're doing that consciously within the story. Mm-hmm. Or if they're doing it consciously within the making of the movie to be like, well, let's, tear some shirts off while we're doing this, at least.
Right.
But it serves the story, is your point.
Yes.
Tear off all the clothes you want as long as it serves the story.
Sure.
More sex maniacs in movies, I say.
Yeah. I also do want to highlight, there's a couple sequences in this movie that I really, really love. And the one is when Isabella is walking from the cab to the house and she never makes it. Mm-hmm. because it's both like so beautifully shot.
Yeah. Yeah.
It looks so fucking cool. And it's a legitimately scary scenario. Like, you know, any woman or any person alone at night who doesn't feel, you know, totally comfortable, maybe, if you've walked through an area like that, you might get a little nervous.
Yeah.
You might kind of wonder, like, is somebody in the dark and I just can't see them, but they can see me?
Right.
But it's also, it's such a cool scene. It's also so insane because, like, how far away is this road?
Yes.
like she walks through what looks like a quiet and lesser traveled section of Central Park to get from where the cab drops her off at the gate to the front door.
It's a
and she
classy
never makes
establishment.
it all the way. It's a very classy establishment, but it's supposed to be in Rome.
Right. Yes.
Like, Rome is a big city, and I'm sure some of the suburbs outside of the downtown count as Rome.
Right.
But I still love it, even though, you know, again, it's that thing of you can't let logic get in the way of the style.
Yeah.
In this movie.
Yeah. And that, you know, that is also something I wanted to talk about too. We were talking about it a little bit after we watched it last night, where I don't know if it is a conscious choice creatively, or if it's just, as you were kind of saying, that it was part of the way things just were at the time in Italy. But I love in these movies how they contrast crumbling old buildings and manors, houses, with very modern, very cutting edge of fashion and style as for the places that these movies take place. Because it creates a really interesting contrast of you know, the old crumbling architecture that's been around for, you know, 200 years or whatever, and this just collection of shit with these beautiful people who are always immaculately put together and have the hippest like it's always like there's a really great couch and a really awesome rug inside a building that was probably there 300 years ago or something.
Yeah, and I would not be surprised if part of that was just these locations existed and were available at the time, and you know, there are plenty of places in Eastern Europe and probably around the world where you can go and have that experience. Like, trust me, there are some really cool bars in Budapest where you can. They're called ruin bars. If that gives you any hint.
Yeah, it's I just, you know, whether or not it was intentional, I like the image that it creates of this sort of trying to maintain the appearance of what's the word I'm looking for? Not wealth, but prosperity in all of its forms. But you're doing it inside this thing that is old and falling apart and dying. You know, like it's
and the sort of tug of war between like the modern and the ancient.
Yeah. And I'm sure some of that has to do with, you know, this is only 20 years after World War II. And you've got, the big political sort of revolution isn't the right word, but that doesn't happen for another few years. But 1968, for whatever reason, the whole world just went nuts. And 68 is when Italy kind of fell into this thing, what would be called the Years of Lead, which was far left, right extremists start causing, you know, urban terrorism. It's very similar to what was going on in Ireland and stuff. And apparently, to this day, people who live in Rome won't walk on the same side of the street as a federal building because they used to get bombed and stuff. But it's really interesting because it's during this era is where these movies kind of come out of. Like, I don't know if they're exactly reactionary, but you get the Giallo boom, the Poliziotteschi boom, which is all these more violent cop movies, which I would do a podcast just on those because they're fucking awesome. But it's really interesting to see what's going on around this time that's kind of funneling into these movies that are being made.
Right, especially in a movie like this where so much of the focus is on these are supposed to be models at a fashion house. Like, it's supposed to be sort of about this idealized version of beauty, and they're supposed to be existing in this kind of rarefied air where they're lovely and it's a successful business, and so, you know, they are supposed to be fashionable and hip and kind of living the high life in a way, and then a lot of them you find out that they're drug addicts or they're broke or both, and maybe they live in a beautiful house but maybe it's also falling apart. So it's this really the tension of it all happening at once is really interesting, and seeing what has filtered in from real life into this very surreal and kind of dreamlike movie where it's, you know, it's still the 60s. They're still kind of chain smoking cigarettes and having love affairs and doing all those very 60s things.
Yeah. And I think that's a big part of what's missing. It's one of those things where I feel like so on one of these documentaries, they referred to Giallo movies less as a genre and more as a cycle. And I think that's kind of true, because I don't know if you can really make a Giallo movie today the way you could just make a horror movie or a science fiction movie, because there's a really specific kind of blend of spices, so to speak, that make these movies special. And I just don't think that combination exists anymore. You know, or if it does, I think the people who are trying to replicate it are missing some pieces from it.
Yeah, and it's kind of like what would be the point of trying to replicate it exactly?
Right.
You know,
yeah.
like maybe there's going to be a similar, like as you put it, cycle at some point, but it's going to be fundamentally different because it's going to be coming out of a different era with different sensibilities and all of that.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting to see too, as we've talked about many times at this point, how the pieces, as they get put through the different filters of the different countries, turn into different things. Obviously, the Giallo kind of gets filtered through the American cheesecloth, or a head sack, if you will, and turns into slasher movies.
Yeah, and I like how within the Giallo films, you see that filtering happening on a smaller scale. Like from movie to movie, like the general conceit kind of being recycled, or even like if you tried to describe the killer in this movie, it's a figure in a black trench coat and a black hat wearing black gloves
with a blank face.
Yes, but like the hat and the gloves and the trench coat and everything, that just described like all Giallo murderers.
Yes, this is where that archetype comes from, is this movie. Yeah, and I think that's what that's the thing that just gets me with these, that makes them special, is there is this just level of surreal. Is it surreality? Is that the word to use? Is that a word?
Sure.
That a lot of other movies don't. Like, even if you look at slasher movies, right? Most slasher movies they will have supernatural, fantastical elements, but they are relatively grounded. You know, even though Jason Voorhees is some sort of unkillable demon thing coming up from a lake, the movie mostly operates with the rules of physics for the most part, you know? Whereas
well, and people are sort of existing in a world that is, at least on the surface, recognizable as our world.
Right, yeah.
Right, like people live in normal suburban houses, or there's a rundown gas station, but it's not like the rundown gas station out of that weird dream you had 10 years ago.
Yeah,
it's
not
just sort
where
of like, yeah.
Bob hangs out above it.
Right. Things are maybe unusual, but they're not on that same wavelength of surreality and dream logic of, wait, how is this house even laid out? Or how do we get from here to there? Or why would this person decide to pull the body out of the trunk and drag her inside?
Yeah.
Like, who would do that? It's like, no, in an American slasher movie, the trunk pops open, the girl's body flops out, the other girl screams and starts running, and the killer walks out of the woods with a knife.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Like, that's what happens in a more modern version of this.
You don't get something like the end of Tenebrae, where the girl gets her hand cut off and creates a modern art piece of blood on the white wall she happens to be standing in front of.
Oh my god, it's so good.
How do you like the characters in this?
Not particularly, but I don't. It's as we're talking about this movie, I feel like I am making 7,000 excuses to just say, like, but I like the vibes.
That's fine, man. It's okay.
Because I'm like, the logic doesn't matter, Clay.
Right.
And whether or not you can figure out who the killer is doesn't matter, Clay.
Yeah.
And whether or not
I'm
you
not
like
fighting
the
you on
characters
any of
also
these.
doesn't matter, Clay.
I'm not, trust me, I'm not
like,
fighting you on any of those points.
But I feel like I'm being so defensive over it, so I feel like I am fighting with you even as you're not fighting with me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, one of the things that I push back a lot on in movies in general, and just, I don't know, I try to, it's tougher in comic books when you're trying to get as much across as you need to get across, but like I tend to err on the side of let the characters show you who they are through what they do versus giving you a lot of backstory and explanation, yada, yada, yada. And so I really love something like this where they drop you into it and they give you enough to kind of like whet your appetite. But as far as who these people are, how they're really connected, what's going on, it doesn't really matter because your brain's going to put those pieces together for you. Maybe you don't, maybe they don't, but it's like it doesn't matter in the larger scale of the story that's being told. It's all just like world building that's just enough on the periphery to make the story engaging and make it work, but you don't have to waste time being like, well, Tao Lee and I go back to when we were in college. And like, there's no scenes like that where they're trying to create a red herring by being, by having someone tell a monologue about how Peggy one time did something horrible 20 years ago. You know what I mean?
Right. And I think that's, again, it highlights what a smart choice choosing this kind of setting is, because then we all just know, oh, okay, the way these people are connected is they work together.
Right.
The end. Like, okay, some of them are dating some other guys and they're in and out and whatever, but like, fine. We don't really need more backstory than that, because it's just like, yeah, we all work here. We're all models and these guys are designers and she and I are roommates and that's our housekeeper. Like, it can be that simple. It's not like, wait a minute, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
It's like, well, we work here.
And I think, unfortunately, that gets flattened out as these movies get more prevalent, and especially once you, again, run it through the slasher movie filter, you get those types of characters, but that they end up being very uninteresting and hollow because they just turn into bodies to be killed instead of characters with something interesting to contribute that make you think about how the story's going to play out.
Yeah, and I think that these characters are also kind of just bodies to be killed.
Sure.
In a lot of ways, in service of the bigger plot. But in a strange way, I feel like it benefits from not having a main character, because you don't need to set up a contrast of, well, all of these people are horrible, but the main character is good.
Right. Yeah.
And so you can empathize and put yourself in the main character's position, because they're generally, maybe they've made a mistake, maybe they've messed up in the past, but they're generally a good person, and so you can relate to them. this movie doesn't really care if you relate to any of the characters. In fact, I'd say in a lot of ways it actively resists allowing you to relate to any of them.
Mm-hmm.
They live in such a strange world. So it's more just like sitting and watching what's happening is more the point than like getting to know any of them is like, oh, I feel so bad for so and so. I really don't want them to get killed. It's kind of like more of the mystery of like what is happening here and who is doing this and who's going to be next and why is all of this happening.
Yeah.
Is kind of more appealing than, but who is Franco really?
Yeah, I do think it suffers a bit from if it's something you think is a negative and not just kind of charming from the era. It does have some of that 60s thing where a lot of the characters are just big and loud. Like a lot of the women are just sort of like look good and sort of, yell.
Or just quiet and pretty.
Right, yeah. But,
that's
to talk a bit about the visuals, a little bit more about the visuals, I love the setup of, it's, you said that they kind of are just bodies to be killed. The movie does play with that visually because because it's set in this fashion world, which is what are these fashion models but bodies to hang beautiful art off of, right?
Yeah.
And then what's the thing that is more prevalent, the most prevalent imagery in the movie is these mannequins, which are used very, very coolly as far as the different colors that they are and the way that they shine light on them, and the ones that are just sort of like the grid. I don't know what you would call those.
Yeah, they're more like a dress form than a full.
Those are really
mannequin.
cool because they're. I don't know if they're painted or if they're just lit different colors, but you can see through them, so that creates a different texture, and it's kind of, most of the women in this movie end up as mannequins to be dragged around.
Right, and there's shots of, I think, all of the women who get killed. There's a shot of them after they are dead.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Where the camera very pointedly is like, now we're going to stare at this dead woman. Mm-hmm. It's like, I think very much drawing that explicit connection between, they were mannequins in life and now they're a different type of mannequin in death.
Yeah. And I feel like you can draw the line directly from this to something like Suspiria, where, the murders and such are meant to be as beautiful as they are horrific. Mm-hmm. Speaking of murders, what did you think? What did you think of the killings in this?
They were, I think, for the most part, surprisingly effective.
Yeah,
they're pretty low budget. Like, it's the early '60s when this is being made, and they're clearly not going for like full all-out gore. Mm-hmm. When Peggy gets killed, it's pretty gruesome.
Yeah.
like when she gets her face shoved on the hot wood burning stove, that's pretty gross. That's pretty rough.
Yeah.
But like when the other girl gets the sort of iron mitt to the face, it looks a little silly, right?
Sure, yeah.
Like it's not super effective or jarring. But the kills are like creative enough, and as I joked at the top, these sort of weapons of opportunity where it's the killer interacting with the environment that's presented. That's always kind of fun.
Yeah.
Like when it has to be a little more creative than just like, I showed up with a knife and now I'm going to stab you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think they're pretty good. What do you think?
Yeah, I like them. I think that they are, for the time, surprisingly gruesome. And I do think you can definitely see what is coming later in the 70s here. Because, for instance, when Peggy gets burned on the thing, it's not just like he smashes her face into the thing. It's a very slow process, like it's you can see as you're watching that, you've got the eyeball scene from Zombie in the back of your head being like, okay, obviously this is the next generation is slowly pushing an eyeball into a piece of broken wood.
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't really thought about that. That there is a bit of a theme in this of the women who get killed seeing their death coming.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, except for Chow Lei just kind of got drowned, but
she's eyes open.
that's true.
Know?
Her eyes are open. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do find it interesting that Bava was pretty ahead of the game as far as gore in movies go, especially because 1960 you've got Psycho, which is everybody talks about as, oh my god, it's so visceral, and it's you don't see anything, but it's so it feels so violent. The same year, Bava has Black Sunday come out, and the opening scene of Black Sunday is a witch being executed, and the first thing that they do is they take this gigantic iron mask that has spikes inside of it, put it over her face, and then hit it as hard as they can with a sledgehammer in full frame. Like you just see the whole thing, and it's just like blood comes spurting out of it and stuff, and it's like, yeah, okay, sure, Hitchcock, have fun in the shower. We're gonna just start showing you everything.
Well, I mean, I think that's a really that's really interesting context of how different things were being done in countries other than the United States at the time.
Yeah.
Right? Because we were still coming out of like the Code era, where everything is, like when we did the original House of Wax a few weeks back, and it was kind of like they can't talk about anything. They can't.
Right. Yeah.
They can't even like talk about smoking or whatever. Like nobody can do these things anymore. It all has to be very wholesome. The rest of the country, the rest of the world was not necessarily following that pattern.
Right. Yeah. And again, 1968. 1968 is when Bonnie and Clyde and the Wild Bunch come out, and that's like the floodgates open as far as movie violence in America goes. Whereas you've got stuff like this already happening in Italy, and the Hammer movies are all pretty gory, not quite as realistic, obviously, but it is interesting to see how this stuff is different in different parts of the world. Like the parts of the world where the war actually happened and not just kind of had people go away to the war.
People didn't just think about it.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it, honestly, but that's a different conversation. Do you like the music?
I do.
Yeah.
The music's fantastic in this, especially that sort of like opening theme that runs throughout.
Yeah, it does a great job of setting up that opening sequence is so cool.
Yeah.
Apparently, it was not scary enough for the American distributors, though, so they actually hired Filmation, which is a animation company, to shoot a new opening, which is on the Blu-ray. It's not a cartoon, but it's surprisingly in line with the rest of the movie because it's all mannequins. It's all mannequins with really intense like red and blue and green lights on them and stuff. So clearly they saw the movie and knew what they were doing. But
Mannequin Month continues.
Yeah, Mannequin Month.
Mannequin season.
Let's do it. Yeah, I think unless there's anything else you want to talk about, I think that's going to do it for Blood and Black. Great title too. That's the American title.
I was going to say, I think it's better. What's the Italian one? Is it like six women for the murderer?
6 women for the killer. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not quite as good, but
I don't. What do you like?
I'm sure in Italian it sounds nicer.
Blood and Black Lace or Red Knights of the Iron Hand?
Ooh.
Red Knights of the Iron Hand. I know what it sounds like now. It sounds like some sort of neo-Nazi racist group.
It does. Yeah, it does. I was gonna say I like Blood and Black Lace better anyway, but now I really prefer that one. Yeah.
We don't talk about it, but my grandfather was
a red knight.
Yeah, he was a red knight
Hand.
in the Order of the Red Knights of the Iron Hand. Anyway, yeah, I think that's gonna do it. How do you feel about this being on the list? Would you put it on it? Would you not?
I'm kind of surprised it's not on there.
I am too, yeah.
Being that it's so formative for the Giallo movies that come later. It just surprises me that it's not. But I I'm guessing it lives in a little more obscurity than, say, Suspiria.
Yeah, I don't think... Yeah, there are no Bava movies on the list, which I think is a crime, personally. But
You're going to sue Rotten Tomatoes.
yes, for your constantly changing, completely arbitrary list. I would 100% put this on. I would put at least...
Yeah.
I would put this. I would put Black Sunday, probably Black Sabbath as well. I would put at least 3 of his movies on this list, if all things being equal. But we can talk about those more eventually, sometime down the road. I think you're really gonna like Black Sunday. Black Sunday is really cool movie.
I'm excited for it.
Cool.
So,
but before we get to that, we are going to be back with the movie we were supposed to do this week, which is The Others. So which we'll be covering that next time. If you'd like to help support the show, head over to patreon.com/thepenskyfile and follow along as Amanda and I go neck deep, boot deep on reboots and remakes this year.
I see what you did there.
January, we watched House of Wax. This February, we will be doing the 1970s version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is going to be really I'm really looking forward to that. I might actually... I might see if we can get Wes on for that one as well, because that's not only did we do that, we did the original with him, and also this one has Leonard Nimoy in it, so we get the Star Trek connection.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I'm going to see if we can get that together. But until then, Amanda, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Clay.
Thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.